guest speaker today is Hayen from the city. He's the director of finance, and so I've asked him to come up and say some words of wisdom for us. So, Bernie,
thanks, Andrew. What's really interesting is his sister is my assistant director. And I don't know if you know Emily Campbell or not, but smart young lady. I was just telling Andrew, and he always thinks she's going to get a big hit. I want to talk to you just about a few things this morning. And tell you some stories. I teach up at K-State and have for about 20 years, in addition to being a finance director here. And I tell my classes all the time, stories sometimes make the best sense. I want to go back. I'm going to go back to the 20s in just a minute, but I want to tell you about the 1980s. If you look at anything that was going on, and I know what you do. I was talking to Andrew, and I know you're kind of a referral group. I can't tell you how important that is from the standpoint of today. And I'll get to that in a moment. But if you look back in the 1980s, you look at communication and cooperation and collaboration. Those were the three buzzwords that seemed to tie everything together. And I always kind of smiled. Communication and cooperation makes sense. Those stay with us today. I'll get to that in a minute. But the collaboration side, and maybe it's my age, but I go back to well, Vietnam and a little bit before that. And if you were a collaborator, you got shot in the war, you know. So I've always thought this collaboration thing was kind of odd. I want to take you back to 1920 for a minute. Some of you may know this. Ever heard of a guy named John Brinkley? He was over here at Milton Saffron Books. Yeah, well, of course you would. Yeah. Very interesting piece of history. He had a hospital in the 1920s that he built, and now what is underwater Milford. Okay, not the new town of Milford, but the old town. And he was known as the goat gland doctor because he found, in his belief, that there were certain glands in a goat that if you transplanted those into men, that they would make them more virile and keep their youth a little bit like a shot of testosterone, I guess. And he became extremely famous. And if you're not sure how famous he became, right over here in Kansas, he actually ran for governor twice. He ran against a guy named Harry Woodring in 1930. And he would have won, except that he had his medical license finally pulled by the Kansas State Healing Arts Board. And the reason he ran for governor is because he was going to get his license back. The Attorney General said that, at the time, said that you couldn't write in his name. He actually was a write-in candidate. He had a radio station that became so wildly popular across Kansas that he almost beat Woodring in the gubernatorial race. Would have won, except that the Attorney General said that you had to spell his name exactly right, J.R. Brinkley, in order for the vote to cast, to be credited. And they said in retrospect there were somewhere around 60,000 to 80,000 write-in votes that in today's electoral process would have passed. So he lost. He would have won. He ran again a few years later against Alf Landon and lost. But it's a little piece of Kansas history. But there's something about Brinkley that he did in terms of communication, and that's one of those key buzzwords that I was going to mention to you. One of the things that he did very well, and when he finally lost his license, lost the gubernatorial race, finally moved to Texas and set up, and some of you that are, well, not many of you are my age, but I should remember some of the radio stations across the Mexican border that were so loud that you could pick them up any day, any time of the day when I was growing up. And they had different music on them and everything else. Those were Brinkley's radio stations. He became quite an entrepreneur, and he did that intentionally to get his message across the border about goat glands and how valuable they were if a man would allow them to be implanted somewhere in your body. Well, piece of history there. I'm going to take you up now to the 1980s when this whole idea of communication and cooperation and collaboration really became popular. IBM. And IBM, I used to work with them. IBM, in another life, when I was younger, but IBM had in their offices huge signs all around the walls that said, "Think." And that was the big thing that really drove IBM. And of course, IBM thinking that as Big Blue, that there was nobody going to be any better in terms of computer technology. But they were talking the big computers. And all of a sudden, these small little PC computers came on. About the same time, a fellow named Ken Olsen, who was the president of Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, Some of you may remember that, but most of you probably don't, because Ken Olsen said that in his estimation, there would never be a personal computer in anybody's house. That you wouldn't need them because there's only going to be about 6 computers worldwide, and everybody would have a dummy terminal tapped into it. There'd be no need for a personal computer at all. Probably why DEC isn't in business anymore. They went out of business in the 80s. Back to IBM. IBM said they got this idea that they probably ought to get into the personal computer business because there were a bunch of upstarts that were coming in. So they got a hold of a company called Intel and said, can you make us a processor that would fit in a smaller computer? And then they got a hold of a little company called Microsoft and said, do you know anything about operating systems? Well, Bill Gates, who was a Harvard dropout, had no idea what an operating system was, but he said sure, because they were just getting into the technology business. And so they developed, I don't know if Andrew, you ever heard of QDOS? It's called Quick and Dirty Operating System, QDOS. And they developed that for IBM. And, but when Intel and IBM got with, or Microsoft got with IBM, they said, we don't want to be tied down to one company. Will you let us market this elsewhere? And IBM figured that it would take them 5 years to sell probably 250,000 of these personal computers if they ever took off at all, because some of them still believe that Ken Olsen with DEC was right, that it was never going to be a big fad. So they said sure. So they allowed Intel and Microsoft to process the processor and the operating system to other companies like Dell, Compaq, and a whole bunch of others. And it was probably one of the biggest blunders that a company's ever made, which makes you wonder if they were really thinking at all. Because IBM sold over 3 million personal computers in that 5-year period, but they had such staunch competition from Compaq, Dell, Hewlett-Packard, and others that they never did gain the edge on that personal computer business. And in fact, today, Intel or Microsoft are twice the size of IBM in terms of annual sales. So it shows you a little bit how this communication thing really works. And you know, sometimes, perhaps all of you, you sit around here on a Tuesday morning or whenever you all get together and you think, is there any real value in what we do? I'm telling you, there is. And that's how the big ideas start, and that's how the businesses keep going and grow. I'll take you to one more, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the problem today with communication and cooperation, and the new buzzword, which is not collaboration, but connectivity. It's replaced collaboration as being right there at the top with communication. About just a few years ago, in an Illinois Walmart, this has happened, not this particular instance, but a whole bunch of issues around Walmart. Walmart prides itself, Sam Walton used to say, it's a respect for the individual, customer service, and an excellence in everything we do. Those are the 3 pillars of Walmart. Okay? Respect for the individual, customer service, and an excellence in everything we do. There was a lady, 80 years old, up in Illinois, shopping at Walmart, came out and decided to buy a newspaper. And she had just had major shoulder surgery, had on a hooded sweatshirt, not a zipper, but a hooded one. And as she turned around, after she opened up the paper thing to get the door, she turned around, her collar, the hood on her thing got caught in the paper thing, and it slammed shut. And she couldn't move, and she was kind of bent over like this, and she couldn't move. And a couple of people saw the dilemma, went over and tried to help her, but her shoulders, they couldn't get the sweatshirt off, and they didn't know what to do. So they went into Walmart, and they said, can you get somebody out here to help us? And Walmart said, well, we can't because we don't have any business out there by the newspaper things, and we've been told that that's not our property. And so they said, well, can you give us a couple of quarters then or something to see if we can get this thing open? And they said, no, we can't do that either because there's no refunds on the newspaper things. So they went outside, and the lady didn't have any quarters. Nobody else had any quarters. Finally, after about 20 minutes, they called the newspaper up. The newspaper refused to come out. After about 20 minutes or so, they another passerby, had a couple quarters, stuck it in there, and freed the lady from being there a little over 20 minutes in this awkward position. Now, that's not a big issue, not a great story. But I'm telling you, it tells you all about communication and cooperation today. And you add to that this issue of connectivity, and you all know what that is, because you all have your smartphones and everything else. I'll give you a little side story. Back last October and November, I was getting in my car, and I thought I heard something fall, but I wasn't sure. And I backed out of the driveway, and I ran over my cell phone. And I heard this pop. And you know, there's that instant panic that how in the world am I going to live without this smartphone? And I kept thinking, the next day I thought, I'll go down and get one replaced. And then about 3 or 4 days passed, and I had this epiphany that I didn't really need this damn thing. And I haven't had one since. Now, my granddaughter and my daughters, they still go into a tizzy when they know I don't have a cell phone. But I'm getting along just great without it. Nobody calls me. I can actually drive from point A to point B, and nobody calls. And I don't really need to call anybody. I get to where I'm going just fine. That's this issue of connectivity. And I want to tell you, what you're doing today, talking to each other and doing it face to face, instead of trying to do all of this by technology, thinking of the IBMs, thinking of the John Brinkleys of a year era past, dealing with radio towers and these odd quack remedies that he devised, made a lot of money doing so. The best value yet today is what you're doing. And I'll tell you, the thing that's probably most troubling is that if you look at cooperation and communication and now connectivity has taken over our lives. I don't mean to sound like a Luddite and sound like somebody who's against the technology. It's quite the opposite. I'm a firm believer in it. But the thing we have lost is talking with each other face to face and talking about issues, talking about referrals, which is what you all do, and trying to figure out how we're going to make our lives better, not through the internet necessarily, but by working together, collaborating together, don't get shot for it, and talking to each other about the things that are most important in our lives. That's where the value is. And the thing that really probably bothers me the most as I look at younger generations, even younger than you, maybe up on campus, is it's awfully hard to get it through their heads that there's a life beyond what they're doing as they walk around campus, either texting or talking on the phone, and trying to make sure that they understand that the value of really good communication and cooperation happens right where you're at today, doing what you're doing. So, that's the spiel. Andrew, I hope I didn't take too long. And I applaud you for what you're doing and the time you take to do it, because you cannot believe the value in doing just exactly that. Thanks again.